Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, this is Sophia Asan of the Reproductive Health Supplies Coalition. The webinar will be starting in a few minutes.
Hello, Madison?
Yes.
Hi, this is Sophia Asan of the Reproductive Health Supplies Coalition. The webinar will start in a couple of minutes. Hi, this is Sophia Asan of the Reproductive Health Supplies Coalition. We'll get started in just one more minute or two as we have a few more people joining. Welcome to you all. This is Sophia Asan of the Reproductive Health Supplies Coalition. We welcome you today to this webinar for the Safe Abortion Supplies workstream of the NERT caucus. We appreciate your time in joining us today, and a few administrative notes. We want to let you know that you are all in listen-only mode throughout the webinar, and you can type questions into the questions box that you see on your screen at any time. Those questions will be addressed in a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. That Q&A session will be approximately 15 minutes. So we are very pleased today to be welcoming the Concept Foundation to present for us this webinar on what can be done to increase the affordability of Combi packs, analysis of cost components, and dynamics behind the pricing of this product. I will give a brief introduction of our speakers today. We have Lester Chinnery, who is the Director of Programs at Concept Foundation and the Program Director for the Quality of Reproductive Health Medicines Program. Lester has over 20 years of senior level reproductive health family planning experience working with Concept, IPPF, and its subsidiary company, Icon Limited, which he founded in the year 2000, serving as its managing director slash IPPF Director of Procurement Services until 2008. Prior to that, Lester was contraceptive social marketing manager for IPPF's European network, introducing a range of low-cost contraceptives across Eastern Europe in partnership with commercial manufacturers. He was IPPF's first representative at the time of formation of the RHSC and served on the executive committee in 2006. Lester has managed the development and introduction of the first Combi in more than 20 countries. We are also joined today by Alessandra Tomasini, head of the technical services at Concept Foundation. Alessandra is a medicines and API quality assurance management expert with over 20 years of experience in the low and middle income countries context. Originally a pharmacist, post-graduated in quality engineering with focus on statistics and risk assessment. She has since worked internationally, managing tech transfer processes, new site startup, and preparing API and FPP sites for EU and WHO GMP inspections. She worked for the last 8 years as the head of technical services for the Concept Foundation, and she was invited as trainer by Anvisa, the Brazilian health authority, providing lecturer services on different areas and topics. As the head of technical services, Alessandra oversees the organization's technical activities relating to product development, transfer of technology, and support to API and FPP manufacturers on GMP. Our third and final presenter is Shadia Alawaddin. Shadia started her studies in political sciences at the University of Geneva, Switzerland, before moving to London to study global governance and public policy at Birkbeck University. She completed a certificate in strategic and operational marketing ahead of joining the Concept Foundation. She joined the Concept Foundation in 2015 in the family planning program, where she was involved in the assessment of the manufacturer's a cost of goods sold model, and business case for the introduction of a generic contraceptive. In 2019, she moved into the role of Business Development Manager, managing Concept Foundation's services contracts with its manufacturing partners, and she oversees the market access related activities. So we are pleased to have these presenters with us today. And on that note, I will now hand things off to Lester Chinnery.
Thank you, Sophia. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the globe. Thank you for joining this webinar on increasing the affordability of quality assured combi packs. And thank you also for my two colleagues who are going to walk you through the different components of our analysis, focusing specifically on an overview of the mifepristone, misoprostol manufacturing landscape, and then secondly, the exercise that we undertook around cost of goods manufactured modeling exercise. Next slide, please. So before we get into the details of the analysis, I thought it would be useful if we just frame the context of the webinar and the analyses around medical abortion. So there are multiple challenges to be overcome in order to improve access to medical abortion drugs, from creating an enabling environment to affect legal and policy change, increasing market demand, procurement and distribution, all the way through to regulatory barriers. Of course, at the same time, we need to ensure that these products are accessible and affordable in low middle income country settings. And in addition to that, there are a number of ongoing manufacturing challenges that impact the availability of combi packs, which are also linked to the challenges above. For example, whilst there are multiple manufacturers of combi packs and standalone mifepristone and misoprostol products, there is a limited number which are currently quality assured, based upon the definition of either being pre-qualified by WHO or having a live approval by a stringent regulatory authority. The manufacturing processes for this product are particularly challenging, specifically in relation to misoprostol. The registration requirements and the pathways to registration modalities are complex, and as a result can be quite costly. And also there is limited access to affordable mifepristone and misoprostol active pharmaceutical ingredients, which for low and middle income countries need to be both affordable as well as being documented as quality assured. So with that backdrop, Concept Foundation engaged directly with selected industry partners in order to better understand some of these barriers from a manufacturer's perspective, and also take a shot at identifying some possible solutions. So the outcome of the exercise was the recently published cost of goods sold analysis and recommendations to reduce costs of co-packaged mifepristone, misoprostol for medical abortion. And this publication and analysis focused specifically on two areas. And the two recommendations which came out strongly in the publication and which we kind of ended it on were the need to increase the availability of quality assured API sources, which are also affordable within the context of finished product pricing for low and middle income countries. And we also looked at the impact of the manufacturing location on the price of finished pharmaceutical product. So with that introduction, I'll hand over to Alessandra, who will take us through a little bit of the landscaping around mifepristone and misoprostol.
Thank you, Lester. So basically, you can move to the slide number 3, please. I cannot see the slides because I'm using my phone, so I will need some help. So basically on this slide, we can see that the number of manufacturers or number of countries manufacturing mifepristone API is not that much. We have mainly manufacturers in Europe and on traditional countries as India, China, and Taiwan. You can go to slide number 4, please. And we have an additional challenge here because to work with quality assured API manufacturers, we request and consider that QA assured manufacturers are the ones with WHO PQ, CEP, or SRA approval. So examples of quality assured suppliers for mifepristone API, we have 3 in France, in fact, PCAS, Expansia, VLG, 1 in Spain, Crystal Pharma, and then Zizou Pharmaceutical in China. Other manufacturers would need to provide GMP evidence for GMP compliance and also a distance and quality documentation following the WHO guidelines. You can change the slide. For misoprostol, is slightly better. We can see more countries manufacturing misoprostol API, US, Israel, in addition to India, China. In Europe, basically UK and Hungary, that is a supplier connected with, the headquarters is in France, in fact. And we also have Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. So we don't have also so many places manufacturing API. You can go to slide number 6. The requirements for QA assured API is basically the same, WHO PQ, CEP, and SAE approval. And examples of manufacturers that we have, it's Piramal Healthcare, that is mainly used by the finished product manufacturers pre-qualified by WHO. We have Shinoin, that is this company that I have mentioned in Hungary. So we don't have so many options with some examples of QA assured API manufacturers for miso. So basically we have the two main issues that we deal with. That is the geographical location. So basically the suppliers are mainly located in Europe, or US, that usually increases the price. And the suppliers outside these places manufacturing both APIs are mainly focused on supplying SRA markets because usually they have better margin and better prices on these markets. So leaves us with a very limited number of SRA, WHO, PQ, combi packs. Basically, we have 3. One produced by Lini Pharma in Europe, that is SRA approved. Some pharmaceuticals also have Medamon. Oh, sorry, forgot. I really can't see. That is also SRA approved. It's registered in more than 20 countries. Lini Pharma products is registered in Canada and Australia, in addition to Europe. And Zizou Pharmaceuticals that produce also combi pack, that is WHO PQ. So basically, these are the 3 SRA or WHO PQ combi pack products currently available in the market. So this is a small briefing that I had to share in terms of profiles. The current profile for API manufacturers and the number of quality assured combi pack available in the market. And now I would give the opportunity for Shadia to present the COGS model.
So next slide, please. So the COGS is really the outcome of the collaboration between different services. We have the service abortion team that provide us the background. We have to collaborate with the technical team, which are on site with the manufacturers, so really have the knowledge as to how the way of producing a product. And of course, the market access team to build the model. So I've mapped here the different steps that we follow in order to generate this report. So firstly, we wanted to understand the current public health background. Then we had to define the component of the COGS and with data that could be collected across countries and manufacturers. So this was already a limitation. Then we had to define a couple of technical assumption and commercial one. That was important in order for the COGS model to be close to the reality. Although we know it's a model, so we cannot have one model applicable to all manufacturers. Then we build up the model and we start collecting the data. So we had different sources. Firstly, our close collaboration with manufacturers, but also we've collected data from suppliers and data from internets where it was publicly available. Then we start analyzing the COGS and we provided the recommendation. Again, I need to highlight that the COGS is really specific to each company, district specific cost settings. We can move on to the next slide. So the cost of goods model sold. So it's, in our case, the sum of the direct costs that can be attributed to the production of the goods sold by a company. So it includes the material cost, of course. So in our case, the API, the excipients, and the packaging. So in terms of packaging, there's the alu-alu as the packaging, but as well the leaflet, the box, so all of those different elements that we've tried to capture. There's the direct labor cost. So we've classified the laborers in 3 category areas with their subsequent salaries. So there's the manufacturing labor, there's the quality so-called labor with the analyst, the manager, and the coordinator, and the workers where we've put the R&D managers and validation staff. Then we have the operating expenses, which touches on the equipment and on the maintenance. And for the purpose of this exercise, we've decided to add the admin costs, which generally doesn't fit into the cost of goods model sold. But however, we felt it was interesting and relevant to give us a benchmark on the price. So what feeds into the admin costs really varies from one company to another. But it can include, for instance, the marketing costs, the regular costs, the legal costs, advertisement costs. So there's a bit of everything in it, and it's really difficult actually to pinpoint what exactly manufacturers include in this admin cost. So we've estimated this admin cost around 30%. Based on public information that are publicly available, we find that Pfizer was around, admin cost was around 28%, Novartis was closer to 30%. So this is just an average number that we've put, but to give us an indication on why the price out there is close to $3.45. However, it's important to highlight that the COGS is not automatically the final cost because there's some commercial factors that kicks in when a company decides to put a price on a commodity. For instance, they can have a manufacturing pricing strategy. They may come with a very low cost, making no profit, but in order to compete and get quickly a high market share, for instance. As well, there's sometimes upfront investments. So the company needs to have a short-term return on investment due to cash flow situation. So there's many dynamics that kicks in when a company decides to put a price tag on a commodity. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So here I laid out I have some because there was many assumptions that was selected to build our COGS models. There was also called technical assumptions, but also commercial assumptions. So the technical assumptions, there has, of course, the formulation of the product. we had to apply a correction to the formulation in terms of assay. 95% assay was applied to the API for misoprostol and 97 for mifepristone. And as well, we had to evaluate the batch size because this was critical in terms of the labor cost. Then for commercial assumption, if you've been through the report, we've decided to base our COGS for a company that would be based in India and Bangladesh, where we see that there's already an existing pharmaceutical industry. And we thought it was interesting really to compare two countries because we know that depending on the location on the manufacturing side, it influenced the price of the product. We can see this between a manufacturing site, for instance, that are based in Europe and the ones that are based in Asia that are generally more competitive, as we know. Another assumption that we made is we decided to apply a discount rate to the raw materials. So when we've identified costs of suppliers, we had to consider that most of the manufacturers buy the raw materials in big volumes. Sometimes they have as well a long-term relationship. So we've decided to apply a discount to be more close to the reality. Another assumption is that we decide that the raw material and the API would be outsourced. And we apply a depreciation rate of 50% per year. And the last one is really as well an important assumption is that our assumption was that it was the optimal market situation. All the units that were manufactured would be sold. And we know that if it's not the case, in theory, it should have an impact on the price for the manufacturer. So already just looking at those couple of assumptions, we can see that there are some limitations. For instance, although we've decided that the company would outsource the raw material, we didn't include an import tax on the raw material. We could as well have made the assumption that the raw material was self-produced. That's another assumption that we haven't explored. And in terms of packaging, we know that the combi pack could be in different materials, and we've decided to focus on alu-alu, which represent the packaging of the products that are pre-qualified. So that is as well a limitation. We can move on to the next slide. So our finding was that the combi pack could be produced from $1.08 to $3.05. And if we apply this 30% admin rate fee, this means that the combi pack could be made available for $1.40 to $3.97, depending on the location and the type of material. So as I said earlier, we've explored different scenarios. The scenario where the combi pack was the cheapest was actually in Bangladesh with non-QA API source material, where the combi pack could be manufactured for $1.40. Alternatively, where the combi pack, where we found it was the most expensive, was in India with, of course, QA API material. So we can move to the next slide, which will focus more on the India case, which is the one probably we come across more often the product. So we can already here see the distinction between the COGS for the misoprostol and mifepristone. For misoprostol, the primary cost component is the operating expenses, which accounts for 72% of the production cost, excluding the packaging. Alternatively, for mifepristone, the primary cost is the API, which accounts for 87% of the production cost. So we can move to the next slide, please. The objective of the next slide was really to map the different scenarios and present it in a nice and an easy way to understand. So we've compared the cost of goods for QA material versus non-QA material. And when I'm saying non-QA, I'm referring to the API primarily. And we compare as well the location, India and Bangladesh. So the COGS for India are in green. For Bangladesh, it's in purple. For QA material, it's in dark. So what we can see straight away is mifepristone is the most expensive component of the combi pack. I just want to highlight one element is the misoprostol here is presented per unit. And so there's 4 units of misoprostol in each box. The other thing is QA materials. So the dark columns are systematically higher than non-QA material. However, the gap between QA and non-QA is not that important for misoprostol. However, the gap is really high when we are considering mifepristone production. And lastly, when we compare the green and the purple columns, we can see that it seems that it's more costly to produce the combi pack in India than actually in Bangladesh. However, what we found out is that the difference is not driven by the labor cost, but mainly the operating expenses. So in the next slide, Alessandra will explain and explore why a QA API is such more expensive.
Thank you, Shadia. Can you go to slide 14, please? So we usually say that quality costs, and this is very true for API and pharmaceutical products. So basically, when we are talking about quality assurance API, the manufacturers usually need to invest on facilities and equipment to comply with WHO SRE requirements, mainly on containment. Especially WHO PQ standards are quite strong on containment, environmental and workers' protection. And in general, precautions and measurements to reduce and control risks related to cross-contamination, despite of other regulatory agencies and norms and guidelines like PIX1 also includes precautions and instructions and even requirements related to cross-contamination risk control. Other aspect that is also important is that having a quality management, a quality assurance structure, it's costly to implement and it's for life cycle. It will always have a costing to keep it the standards that also are always in changing and being more stringent or evolving with time. Other very important aspect is the documentation, the API-MS. Usually quality assurance, the APIs, the API-MS includes more tests, more data, more studies to support, especially the impurity carryover discussion, the API characterization. So it's very complex to prepare it and to keep it updated. And additionally, any change that the API manufacturer wants to implement, when we are talking about quality assurance API, they need to submit to the regulatory authority to have a regulatory screening, and also needs to discuss and get approval from main customers. Additional controls also are considered on API release and even during production to ensure that the impurities and the quality aspects of the API are considered, and the API considered during the whole manufacturing, and the API complies with high quality standards. Stability data needs to be provided to support the retest date or expiry date, and usually should also comply with the ICH requirements for stability. And we also have the high costs, because usually these API suppliers are located in high incoming countries. So labor costings, everything usually is higher. You can go to the next slide, please. So here's only a few examples why it increases because for having lower impurities, usually we need more purifications, requiring more purification steps. It decreases the yield of the batch, increases also the manufacturing costs. We need to use less toxic solvents with higher purity. There are some issues regarding using recycling solvents that cannot be incorporated in the final steps, for example. So all these controls that are required to ensure the better quality of the API, it explains why we have higher costs related to, in addition, validation, analytical methods that need to be also validated even for testing intermediates. So all these aspects are important and needed to be considered. You can go to slide 16. And we have the characteristics of both APIs, the specificities of both APIs that can directly impact the quality of the API, the final product, finished product, and even the safety and efficacy of the product. Mifepristone, for example, has a polymorphism, and if the correct polymorphic form is not specified and controlled and checked during the routine manufacturing, we can have impact on the manufacturability and even in the quality, performance, and bioavailability of the product. And so this is one example of the particularity of the product that, if not considered, can really affect the quality of the finished product. You can go to slide 17. For misoprostol, then the challenge is different. The API, in fact, is an oil, a viscose oil that needs to be stored in very low temperature, below -20. And it's very sensitive to degradation. So usually the finished product manufacturers, they buy the misoprostol dispersion in APMC that is more stable and also facilitates the manufacturing because as it's diluted, it's easier to weigh and incorporate and do the mixing step in the pharmaceutical company. You can go to the slide 18. So it's you, Shadi, again, correct?
Yes. So, so then we've said, as you maybe came across in the report, is it possible to see a QA combi pack at a more affordable price in the future? So we saw that the cost of the combi pack could be lowered as a result of additional QA API source of mifepristone and misoprostol in order to reduce the price. And as demonstrated through the COGS, especially with regards to mifepristones, this could be critical. Of course, any delocalization of manufacturing site in countries where operational costs are more competitive are likely to have an impact on the cost of goods model for the combi pack. However, we felt it was important to highlight that cheaper commodity doesn't mean automatically a healthier market. The production of the good must remain sustainable and thus profitable for the manufacturers, otherwise they will leave the market. And as well, we thought it was important to highlight that with the COVID pandemic situation, we saw the danger of over-reliance on a single source and geographic location. So we thought it was important to highlight this and take this into consideration. The next slide, please. So we've explored the scenario, and especially with regards to the QA API mifepristone, which seems to be critical in terms of the COGS. So we took the assumption of exploring what if the cost of the API mifepristone could be reduced to $5,000 per kilo, because the current price that we used was around 8,278 kilo, which we apply a discount to 15%. And as you can see in the graph, if we were able to reach that point, which we think it's feasible and would still be viable for the producer, would be able to lower down the from $3.97 to $3.42 in India, and to $3.29 to less than $3 in Bangladesh. So next slide, please. So here, Lester will explain how Concept Foundation is supporting safe abortion in 2021.
Thank you, Shadia. So I'll just finish off with summarizing how we're trying to take the learning from our work over the last year or two and operationalize it in terms of our forward activities. So at the moment, Concept is currently supporting some manufacturers with the objective of having one misoprostol API and one mifepristone API, additional APIs pre-qualified by WHO. Is currently supporting 2 finished product manufacturers towards the pre-qualification of their combi packs, is supporting the government of Argentina on the introduction of medical abortion drugs following the recent change of law. We are collaborating with IPPF in order to get an up-to-date quality assessment of medical abortion drugs in 10 markets, which is an activity we're really excited about. And in addition, we are supporting combi pack registration in 2 specific countries and developing. It's a heavy lift, but we are doing our best to develop a business case for manufacturers to support their future investments in medical abortion drugs. This was a requirement that clearly came out of our interaction with the manufacturers, both historically and when going through this cost of goods analysis exercise. So thanks a lot to my colleagues, Alessandra and Shadia, for their contributions to the presentation. I think we can close our presentation now, and I'll hand over to Natalie for the Q&A session.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. These are topics that have come up a lot in our safe abortion supply work stream. So we really appreciate Concept, first of all, doing the work and then taking the time to present to our group. We really appreciate it. So the first question we had was about whether the presentation was going to be shared, and Concept has agreed that we can share this with the workstream members. So after this webinar, you will be receiving, I'm not sure when, but you'll be receiving a PDF copy of their slide set. One question that I have is how we can increase the number of sources of quality API. I wasn't sure on your last slide where you were talking about having one pre-Q API, if that's an existing API, or whether you're looking into other sources. So that's one question. And then another question is, how can we affect manufacturers to actually have new sources of API for mifepristone, assuming that that will help decrease the cost of mifepristone?
I'll take that, Natalie.
Okay.
Yes, we are currently undertaking an exercise with a clear objective in the medium term to have additional API products available for both misoprostol and mifepristone. So in 2020, we completed a landscape analysis of potential new candidate companies who could supply quality assured material. We went through an expression of interest procedure, and at the end of December, we reached a situation where we had 4 companies that were both interested and willing to put their products through pre-qualification, and also were willing to have the discussion about ensuring the material was affordable. It's an ongoing project, so there is an ongoing dialogue around that affordability question, which is directly linked to the business case for manufacturers. So yes, that work is ongoing to try to expand choice and availability for finished product manufacturers, albeit new ones or existing ones.
Terrific, thanks for that. I have a question from Somia. Could the presenters comment on the potential to expand the range of indications for MIFI especially, the hypothesis being that if there are more indications, then there may be more of a market incentive for manufacturers?
So there's a couple of points on that. So in the case of mifepristone, I think absolutely. Our executive director recently wrote a piece on mifepristone, the case for mifepristone for use as an emergency contraceptive. Studies demonstrate that it's highly effective potential form of emergency contraception. It is in use in a few markets here and there around the globe. And I agree that sort of increasing scope of the indications will certainly have an impact on the price of API. I guess the negative is that getting traction on the use of misoprostol because of its close correlation with abortion makes this a little bit difficult. So it's challenging. And whilst we're on the subject, that also, of course, applies to misoprostol, and one of the interesting recent developments is the sort of recognition that with most countries now legalizing abortion anything between 12 and 14 weeks, that the current presentation, including 200 microgram tablets of misoprostol, may not be sufficient in all cases. So there is some thinking around how we could expand, perhaps with additional misoprostol tablets, in order to meet that sort of 14-week window that seems to be more prevalent these days. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, could you expand? Do you mean additional tablets within the combi pack for the higher gestational ages, or distributed separately?
So I think I think we're potentially looking at both, and I guess the optimal presentation would be the availability of additional misoprostol within the combi pack in some way by itself. Now, whether that's additional co-packaged misoprostol or whether it's co-blistered misoprostol, there's a lot of issues around guidelines and evidence and data and regulatory to navigate, but it's an interesting emerging concept.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have a couple of questions about registration. So you had mentioned early on in the talk that registration for mifepristone is complex, and so one question is this more complex for mifepristone, or is it compared to other drugs? And then a second question that we just received about how can we expand the markets in Latin America, and this relies on registration of mifepristone and misoprostol in Latin America. So two questions about registration.
Okay, so I was really hoping that someone wouldn't pick up on the regulatory cost and challenges, but now they have. I'm quite happy to answer. So I think in relation to medical abortion drugs, the primary, so there's two problems. I mean, first, the registration of mifepristone has its own challenges, as we're all aware of, as being the kind of focused drug for the abortion discussion. From a regulatory perspective, it's in fact the misoprostol that presents the greater challenges. There's a range of reasons for that. I mean, for example, companies will need to undertake a bioequivalence study for their misoprostol. If you follow WHO guidelines, the comparator for that is Cytotec from Pfizer. The problem with that, of course, is that the Cytotec product has never been indicated for abortion, and its route of administration is purely oral. So you can pre-qualify your product satisfactorily with WHO, but that doesn't necessarily satisfy the requirements of country regulatory agencies who are looking for an abortion indication, which of course your bioequivalence study doesn't give you. Also, they will be looking for routes of administration which include vaginal, sublingual, and sometimes buccal. And again, that's additional data, additional studies that need to be undertaken in order to comply. And we're having this issue with one country at the moment, where the use of Cytotec is for the bioequivalence study is not considered appropriate by the regulatory agency. The regulatory agency is looking for you to compare with a product which has an indication for medical abortion, for which there are some in Europe. But there's a disconnect on that because the European products are not the comparator products for pre-qualification. So the route to market is unclear at a country level. It differs from regulatory agency to regulatory agency. It often requires additional data post pre-qualification, and that new data will also need to be supported by stability studies for that particular route of administration. So, it's sometimes not always clear from the outset exactly what you're going to have to do and what costs you're going to have to incur in order to, eventually get into a critical mass of markets and start getting a return. Was there another part of that question that I missed, or did I cover?
I think you answered that well, thank you. But I think there's also an additional component of how can we expand the markets of in Latin America specifically that maybe you didn't quite address.
Yeah, well, an important component of that, of course, is at the kind of a policy level on a country by country basis. So I think we are seeing some successes in Latin America now, and hopefully for each success that we see, Argentina being the latest example, this will provide impetus for other countries in the region to follow suit. It's a relatively niche product for most manufacturing in Latin America is done through locally based manufacturers in Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, for example. And this is not mifepristone, misoprostol, and Combipax are currently, because of a lack of market, are not sort of on their radar. They don't have significant experience in developing them. So in the case of Argentina, the companies that are in the local manufacturing environment will need a lot of support to navigate the development process in a way that's satisfactory to the regulatory agency, given what I said before. And also we need to overcome a little bit of a mindset issue, in my opinion, which is encouraging and offering up a landscape for Latin American manufacturers which go beyond their country to the rest of the region and beyond their region to the rest of the world, so that they are manufacturing products which can be used and registered more broadly than just the region itself. So it's a work in progress, I think.
Yeah, I think I think we're going to see hopefully a model case in Argentina that can really set the stage for the rest of the continent potentially. Okay. We don't have any more questions, but I will just ask the group who's on the call right now if anyone has some final questions before we finish the webinar. Please just type them in the box. See if I had any other ones. What do you think is the timeline for the activities that you have on this last slide? When will we be hearing about movement from concept on these different topics?
So if we take the first one around misoprostol and mifepristone API, we would hope to be sort of seeing submission to pre-qualification perhaps within a year, which is a highly optimistic timeline, but you know, we have considered that. I think in reality, in terms of the second bullet point, it's probably likely to be closer to 2 years before you see new products going through the pre-qualification process. But of course, that doesn't rule out more additional API being available, which may allow some of the existing products which are already in the marketplace to sort of reach that sort of WHO pre-qualification standard. I think in Argentina, there's a big momentum at the moment. We're working closely with CEDES, a local NGO, who are working closely with the Ministry of Health. And you know, there is a big momentum in Argentina around understanding what policies and guidelines, what training is required, and we're supporting that in some shape or form with CEDES. At the same time, we're supporting local manufacturing and also supporting through discussions with the regulatory agency. So we will see. The quality assessment exercise to sort of take a snapshot of the current quality landscape by sampling products from 10 markets and testing them in a decent laboratory. I mean, that's going to be done by the middle of this year, and we should be in a position to report upon that in the third quarter. The 2 countries where we are supporting registration is ongoing, and again, that should be completed this year. And we've set ourselves a very broad challenge. You know, the business case for manufacturers will move as quickly as we can get access to the information we need in order to respond to requests or concerns or issues that manufacturers have which require us to respond. So it's kind of going to be ongoing throughout the year, I feel. Thank you.
Great. You have a lot of work to do in the next year. Well, I would like to just take the opportunity to thank you all 3 of our presenters from Concept. We really appreciate you taking the time and coming to talk to us. And I appreciate all of you from the workstream who are on the call today, and thank you for your excellent questions. And I think with that, we'll just close down our webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you a lot. Thanks very much for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.